subscribe, and click the notification bell to have the best nightmares of your life. There's nothing quite like driving down a dark country road after a long day at work, only to suddenly slam on your brakes when you see something sitting on the middle of the pavement. Its jaw is clenching repeatedly, and if you happen to get out of your car like a fool, you'd certainly hear a sloppy, wet chewing sound. Whatever you do, stay in your car, and if possible, just keep driving. But don't get too comfortable, because there's always something else waiting just around the corner. Enjoy these allegedly real eyewitness accounts of strange creatures seen while driving. If you want your story to be featured on this show, share it with us at darknessprevails.org or stop on by to read thousands of true scary stories. My Hound Encounters, from Ravyn S. Location unknown. I was 20 years old when I first saw the scariest thing of my life. Having been interested in the paranormal at the time, I never really came across anything that scared me, let alone anything that couldn't be explained away. So this was a turning point. I was staying with a friend of mine since my boyfriend at the time and I had recently had some heated arguments due to him trying to keep me inside the house, trying to control me, not letting me see my friends from my hometown. I'll call my friend Sean. One night, Sean and I went outside to have a cigarette before bed. The sunset that evening was beautiful. When I looked across the road a little ways, I saw what appeared to be a big black dog. It was walking towards the house, but just before it got into the yard, it stopped, then turned its head to look at me. The dog stared at me for what seemed like several minutes. Then it turned back to the house and vanished. It didn't run away, it just was there and then it wasn't. I flicked my half-smoked cigarette and quickly walked back inside, grabbing Sean's arm, pulling him with me, then locking the door behind us. "What was that all about?" Sean asked before noticing my paler than normal face. All I said was, "The dog." Skip ahead a few months. I was driving home from work one day with my then boyfriend Shane. We got to the house right around sunset, when suddenly, sitting in the gravel parking lot across the street from the house, there appeared that big black dog. This time, I could better see its eyes, which were huge, reddish or orangish eyes, and they were locked on the truck I was driving. I gasped, hit the brakes, and ducked down. I could feel my face turning white. Shane looked at me confused, then glanced into the rearview mirror. He must have seen the thing too, as his eyes suddenly grew so wide. He looked back at me with those huge eyes, understanding why I was so terrified. He happened to be one of the few people I told him of the sighting of the first dog, which we now believe to be a hellhound. He got out of the car and began to walk over to the all-black, red-eyed dog. When he came back to the truck and sat down, he was trembling. Without me even asking, he stared straight ahead, then he began to mumble what happened. As soon as I got to the center of the street, it disappeared, vanished into thin air. Between then and now, Shane and I broke up, and I have not seen the Hellhound again. I can't help but wonder if its appearance was perhaps a warning of some kind, but I can't be sure. After doing some research, I did find that hellhounds are said to be the protectors of the supernatural, guarding its secrecy. Maybe it knew that I was sniffing around things that I shouldn't have been. It just goes to show you that sometimes you don't have to go looking for the paranormal, because the paranormal could come looking for you. Silhouette, from Willoughby Lucas 8. Location: North Carolina. I'm a truck driver, and I've seen a few things that just don't make sense. On a particular occasion, it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was driving my rig to Jacksonville, Florida, from Savannah, Georgia. I was somewhere between exit 49 and 36 on I-95 when it started. I was listening to music on the radio, driving in the center lane of the southbound lanes. I happened to look over, and there I saw a figure, more of a black silhouette, standing on the side of the road. But the thing is, it was too lanky, way too lanky. Human in shape, but not quite human though. Soon enough, I passed it, and I forgot about it. You'd think that was it, but you'd be wrong. A couple of miles down the road, there it was again. But this time its head followed my truck. I could feel its gaze on me. I was already going as fast as my truck could go, the speed limit being 80 miles per hour there. But I could not get rid of the feeling as if it wanted me. 5 minutes went by, having passed it a second time. Yet still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this thing was still nearby, still watching. And sure enough, I saw it again. This time it was in the middle of the road in the right lane. At the time there were other vehicles around me, and one had its headlights on, heading straight for the silhouette. I noticed that the headlights did not shine on the creature, but instead went right through it, as if it wasn't there at all. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, until the car hit its brakes and began to swerve around it. Once the driver regained control, they took off doing at least 100, obviously frightened from what they saw. The creature turned its head towards me as I drew closer. Uncomfortable and frankly a little scared, I did the taboo of moving into the far left lane in a rig. After moving over, the creature shook its head, and as I'm about to pass it, it starts running next to me, staring at me through the window. It keeps up, looking as if it isn't even breaking a sweat. As it was running, it was steadily getting closer to my truck. When it got so close where I couldn't see it due to the height of the windows, I suddenly heard a loud thud and felt the wheels on the truck run something over. When I looked in the mirrors, I saw it go limp in the middle of the road. Then it wisped away like smoke on the wind. When I finally got to a stop to look at my truck, the only damage I saw was a dent in the bumper. There was some sort of black fluid drying on it. I washed the bumper off, but that black substance would not come off. I still make this run on a regular basis, and I often see this thing limping on the side of the road every so often. I don't know what it is, but it is not something of our world. Driving in the Forest, from Ozymandias 111. Location: Arkansas. I was about 20 at the time, and I was in the Navy. I got leave around Christmas, so I went back to my hometown in northwest Louisiana, right next to the border of Arkansas. I decided one day to visit my friend's place who was in Arkansas. He lived across from a lake that was in a national forest. I was driving to his house around 9 p.m. in my old Chevrolet S10. I drove through the forest and around the lake to his place. We started drinking and catching up on things that had happened ever since I went to boot camp. Around 1 a.m., I had overdone the drinking, and I decided I should drive home. A very bad, stupid decision. As I was driving and I got past the lake and into the forest, I was swerving and decided that this was a terrible idea and that it would be best to stop and just try to sleep some of this off. I got past the spillway and I turned on this dirt road. I made it to a place that used to be an oil rig or something along those lines. I pulled in the opening, and I turned my truck to where it was facing the road. I turned it off and I locked the doors. I was thinking I was in the middle of the forest at night, so no one should be driving past me or bothering me at all. So relaxed and way too warm, I laid down on the seat and I went to sleep. I woke up not long after with a really creepy feeling. I sat up and turned my light on, and out in the forest, I saw a black figure walk out of the forest and stop right in front of my truck. He stared at me for a moment through the glass, then proceeded to walk into the other side of the road into the forest. Having no idea who or what that was, I noped out of there and drove all the way back to my grandmother's house without stopping. I don't know what that was in the middle of the forest at night, and I probably never will. I'm out of the Navy now, and sometimes I drive down that same road, but every time I do, I can't escape the feeling that someone is watching me. Maybe it was a skinwalker. From Toendall. Location, Southwest Ohio. I work at a freight company on the third shift. I'm the yard guy, which means I move trailers and box trucks around the yard, and I put them onto the docks. We have 2 poorly lit lots in the back of the building that I frequently have to walk back to, aptly named Backlot 1 and Backlot 2. Creative, I know. This is where the semi-trucks are kept for moving the trailers. I usually keep a headphone in one of my ears to listen to podcasts or music. The other ear is left open so I can hear if people call me over the radio. Anyway, there have been some coyote sightings on the property as of late. This is odd, because we are in a warehouse district virtually void of any woodland or wilderness. I've personally seen a coyote in Backlot 1 once or twice, but it usually keeps its distance. The first time, I was in my car driving around the lot, looking for trailers left behind. I spotted the coyote out of my driver's side window some ways off. It seemed like your typical coyote, so no big deal. The second time seeing the coyote, I was getting out of a semi to hook up a trailer to move. Immediately as I stepped out of the truck, I felt a presence around me, as if someone was directly behind me. So naturally I turned. I then noticed what looked to be a large reddish dog staring at me. It was maybe 50 yards away. I looked closer, and I recognized it as the coyote that I had spotted before, but oddly it was much larger than I remembered. I had also taken them to be skittish animals. I didn't think that they would stare you down like this. I shrugged it off as a misjudgment of size on my part and ignorance on their actual territorial behavior. This was around a month ago as of writing this, and I hadn't seen the coyote again until just the other day. When I was out moving trailers around the morning, I felt that presence again. This time, there was a deep-seated feeling of dread amplifying it. It was as if there was a predator actively hunting me. Look, sometimes I know I can be paranoid. Some of the podcasts I listen to certainly don't help with that. But knowing this about myself, I tried to put it out of my mind, so I switched to some music and went about my business. Fast forward to 2 a.m. I dropped off one of the trailers in Backlot 1, and I got out of the truck to crank down the dolly legs. That's when I explicitly heard someone calling my name. The voice had a bit of a static undertone, like it had come from the radio. I picked up the radio to call my boss, and I asked, "Hey, anybody call for me?" He responded with a quick and simple, "Nope." Like I said before, I'm a bit paranoid, but that voice, I did not imagine it. I heard it. This was enough to make me turn off the music entirely until I was done driving and moving trailers in the yard. When I finally finished, it was 3:45 a.m., and I had to take the semi back to Backlot 2 to drop it off for the driver that comes in later. I finished backing the semi into its spot, and when I turned the engine off and opened the door, I heard a long, drawn-out, staticky voice call. It sounded like someone talking over the walkie-talkie, but it was like it was coming through an old record player or phonograph. Not having my music on, I knew right away that this was not my boss or anyone else that I work with. This was not someone coming over the radio, because this voice had come from directly in front of me. I looked up to see that coyote again, staring at me as usual. It was a good 75 yards away from me at that point. I remember thinking to myself, how did it sound so close to me? The scariest part was it looked like it was smiling, distorting its features so that the edge of its mouth curved to look more human. I stared back in disbelief at that coyote, and I did the only thing that came to mind. I yelled at it, Go on, get out of here." The coyote's reaction to this was not something that I would have expected. It began to stand on its hind legs. As it did this, I heard what sounded like joints popping and cracking. Its shape became more humanoid, with the exception of its legs and head, but its paws dangled from the sides like human arms. As it was reaching an upright position, I had already freaked out and closed the door on the semi, shutting myself back in the truck. I watched the thing's mouth widen into a larger grin, exposing just how many razor-sharp and all too white teeth the thing had. I started the truck, thinking my only way out was to run this thing over, then head back to the dock where my coworkers were, as well as some more illumination. I guess the creature took the truck starting as a challenge, because it suddenly began to bolt towards me. Its new form of locomotion was the most unnatural and surreal thing I'd ever seen. It had this awkward, half-human gait, but it was still faster than I've seen any person run before. I slammed the gas pedal down, and the truck took off. If you've ever seen someone try to floor a semi from idle, then you know I was not going very fast at all. Just when I was about to hit this thing, it jumped to the side of the truck, ran to the edge of Backlot 2, and jumped the fence with ease into a small patch of trees. I kept driving and pulled the truck up to our dock for the refuge of the warehouse. As I stepped out of the semi, I could hear a distorted howl from the distance. I quickly looked around the lot from the deck, but I could not see anything. Hopefully, that's the last that I have to see of this thing. When I got back into the office, my boss asked me why I'd brought up the semi to the dock like that. I told him that coyote was back, that it was in the way of where I was supposed to leave it, and I did not feel safe getting out and walking back. I couldn't just tell him what I saw. No one on this planet would believe me. I'd be surprised if they did. I'm afraid to go back to work tonight. I can't even seem to get to sleep now, because every time I close my eyes, I see that grin. There Was Something in the Road, from Hazy Memories 1. Location: Grand Cayman Islands. This story was told to me by my friend a few days ago. This will be from his perspective. When I was a child, my parents moved to the Grand Cayman Islands for work. Being the smallest of 3 boys, I often get teased a lot with ghost stories of haunted pirates and pirate ships. Now, as a child, of course, I would believe them. These stories were often told by the locals when they were drunk. Now, as an adult, I grew skeptical of all the happenings around me. I recently completed my RCIPS, Royal Cayman Islands Police Service basic training, and I'm now a rookie police officer for the Cayman Islands Bowden Town Police Station. I work mostly night shift with my partner, Peters. We patrol most of the Red Bay area and some parts of Georgetown. We usually take the long route into Georgetown, but on that particular night, we decided to take a shorter road named South Sound. Now this road was much quieter with less traffic, so it's the ideal road to drive at your own pace, which is what I was doing. I was driving at 30 in a 25, sue me, but Peters was asleep so no one could scold me. I bobbed my head to music drifting from the radio as I drove on the dimly lit road. I slowed to a stop at a crossing as I looked for any oncoming traffic. Then I sped off down the road and smiled at the fact that this was peaceful. A few minutes of driving, my headlights reflected off something in the distance. There was something crouched down nearly in the center of the road in the lane I was in. Leaning forwards to get a better view, I realized my light shone through the almost transparent figure. I screeched to a halt, waking up my partner. "The hell, Jones?" he screamed at me, but stopped short when he saw me staring intently at the road. "Do you see that?" I whispered. I was frightened that the thing would hear me. Peters turned to look out the window before hurrying to pull the door. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Someone could be hurt," he uttered as he got out of the car. I hurriedly stumbled after him and raced to his side where he stood motionless. "Peters, what?" I tried to say, but he suddenly spun around to me quickly, which had me step back in fright. It was there, right? I mean, you saw it too," he asked, while shaking my shoulder. I looked towards where the figure had been, crouched in the middle of the road, and my eyes widened. There was nothing there now, as if the creature had gotten up and walked away without us ever noticing. But there was no way anything could just get up and disappear like that, in merely the time it took Peters and I to exit the car. I know some people will say the story is fake, but you'll never be sure until you drive on that lonely road at night yourself. Old Lady Walking Down the Dirt Road. From Vici 87. Location unknown. This happened to my brothers over 15 years ago. At the time, we were going through a very hard time financially, so my brothers and their wives lived with us in a single wide trailer outside of our town. The trailer was parked next to the owner's home. We lived 15 minutes away from civilization. From where we lived, there was a highway known to have a woman appear in the back seat of commuters' vehicles and disappear. That's how the story goes, anyway. To get to our home, you have to get off the main road and drive onto a dirt road. We had neighbors that live along the road, and we all knew each other. Since we lived at the end of the road, we saw who came in and who went out. My two older brothers had gone in separate vehicles into town and returned home like 1 minute apart from each other. My brother saw an older lady dressed in black lace from head to toe walking down the road. But as he passed by, he described her skin was so pale, it wasn't even human. He simply sped up a bit and tried to forget about it. A few minutes later, the other brother is driving down the road to get back as well, and he sees the same lady, but something told him to look back. As he looked into his rearview mirror after passing the lady, he saw that the lady had no feet and she was walking onto the property that we lived on. He freaks out and rushes home, yelling to my mother about what he saw, and his brother confirms the story. My mother grew up in Mexico with all its superstition, and she said it could have been La Muerta, or a female entity similar to the Grim Reaper. My mother exits the house to see if she can see the woman, but this non-human lady is no longer there. There was no way it was a normal person, Because the road we lived on was a long one, they'd have to be impossibly fast to disappear like that. Or, be something supernatural. As if by some bizarre coincidence, it turned out that the landowner's husband was fighting for his life that night, and at one point, his heart even stopped. He survived the night, despite being an older and sickly man. I know it sounds like an urban legend, but it happened to the most skeptical members of my family, my brothers. Chama Skinwalker, from Sabrum 1300. Location, Santa Fe, New Mexico. A while back, when I was maybe 10 or 11, my mom had a fiancé who was a nurse in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We lived in Colorado, but we traveled down there and stayed there many times. Usually, we would go home the morning after he got off work, because it was such a long drive, but this time he just wanted to get back home. He got off at 10 p.m. My mom insisted that we get a room. She seemed a little worried about driving so long and so late, and I had a feeling she was worried about something else as well. About 3 hours later, my mom's fiancé said he was too tired and he had to rest for a few. Again, while driving, my mom insisted that we just get a room. My mom eventually gave up. By this time, I was already asleep in the back of our Hummer. I woke up to what almost felt like a truck running into us and my mom screaming. The Hummer was on its passenger side wheels, tipping back and forth. As this was happening, I was looking out the window in shock because I did not see another truck ramming into us. I saw nothing but darkness. While I was looking out the window started to roll down and I dove onto the floor on the other side of the Hummer. I covered myself with blankets. My mother was screaming at her fiancé to drive, but for some reason the Hummer wouldn't start. Finally, everything just stopped, and the Hummer started. Even the moon seemed to come back and it was bright. I could now actually see around us outside, but I didn't see anything. The dirt around us wasn't even disturbed. My mom's fiancé sped off down the road, and we did not stop until Colorado. We stopped, and I got an explanation somewhat. While we were driving, something rammed into my mom's door. Whatever it was strong enough to tip over the Hummer. My mom's door was now covered in dents and scratches, and her fiancé was too terrified to describe what he saw. Having finally confessed it to my grandmother, she claims it was a skinwalker, and after experiencing that night, I'm inclined to believe it. I have not found the place it happened, though I am afraid that I may stumble upon it by accident. Kentucky Dogman, or Virginia Werewolf, from Hybrid Musician 333. Location, Pound, Virginia. I have seen a werewolf, or as some may think, the Kentucky Dogman, on several occasions. In fact, I saw this creature around 100 times in my life altogether. I'm 36 years old. The first time I saw the werewolf, I was 17. I was driving from Dalton, Georgia, where my parents lived, to my grandpa's house in a small town in southwest Virginia called Pound. The town is located near the Kentucky state line. My grandpa's house is located next to the forest. The forest completely surrounds his home. It was 3 a.m. when I drove up the gravel dirt road that leads to his home. Something felt odd as I drove toward the house. It was completely silent. No animal noises either. Not even my grandpa's dogs were barking like they always did. The worst part was not even crickets were making noise. It was April, and anyone who lives in this area will tell you that this was impossible. I knew this, as I had lived there with my parents until I was 11 years old. As I got closer to the house, driving up the long driveway, I saw something walking down the road from the forest. At first, I thought it was a man who had on a ripped white shirt, ripped dirty brown jacket, and ripped dirty blue jeans. He was walking normally, but when the clouds moved and revealed the moon, it shined enough on him that I could see everything, like the fact that he was covered in fur, had long claws, and his legs were bent backwards. I stopped my little aqua-colored Ford Taurus about 3 feet away from the creature. I thought at first that I had fallen asleep and was dreaming. This couldn't be real. Then, when he noticed me, he smirked like a psycho. He leapt about 3 times, then landed on the hood near my windshield. I screamed and realized this was no dream. Red fluids and drool dripped down on my windshield as it clawed at the glass. Then this creature reached over to my window on the driver's side door and began clawing and hitting the glass. I could tell this creature wanted to hurt me. His eyes burned like fire. I panicked, slamming the car into reverse and hitting the gas pedal. I backed up so quickly and turned into my grandpa's neighbor's driveway. I slammed on the brake then, making the creature fly off the hood. I put it into gear, then drove as fast as I could to get out of Rat Creek Road. I looked in the mirror several times to see if it was following me, and he was. I kept driving out of South Fork towards the town of Pound. But the thing was not going to give up without a fight. It ran up quickly, grabbing a hold of the bumper. I slammed on the brake again, causing it to hit the back windshield. Then it rolled onto the ground. I hit the gas and sped up even faster, trying to escape. Again, the creature leapt from a tree up above the road and landed on top of my car. It growled and groaned in pain and frustration, continuing to claw at the windshield. I slammed on the brakes again. The creature was flung to the ground in front of my car now. I floored it forward, hitting and forcing it under the car. I heard a howl of pain and kept going, hoping that that was enough to keep it from following me. But no, he was still coming. I was crying now. This fear was overwhelming, and I knew if it caught me, then that would be the end of me. When I made it to the main road, after one more chilling howl, the creature turned back. I sped to my friend's house, crying and panicking about the experience. It took me a half hour to calm down. I had actually seen and been attacked by a werewolf. Or as some people who I spoke with have told me, it was a Dogman. I live on the same land my grandpa's house is located on now, and sadly, that may mean that I see that thing again. Be careful out there and watch out, because you may be the next one this happens to. The Lizard Humanoid. From Anonymous. Location unknown. This story is from my father, who told me about it one day. One late night, him and his girlfriend at the time were driving somewhere. He had to be cautious since it was so dark outside. As he slowly drove down the road, his girlfriend suddenly said, "What is that thing?" My dad looked over to the spot on the side of the road where she was pointing. He saw this thing walking around. When he passed it, it kept pace with his car. He said it was shaped like a short person, but with reptilian features. He couldn't tell if it was just a person playing a prank or if it was real. But in his opinion, those scales on it, they were far too real. They never knew what the thing was, alien, humanoid, or who knows. He was just happy that it eventually stopped running after them, because its claws looked razor sharp. Now, get ready for a blast from the past. The following story is a scary good one from 2017 that many of you may not have heard. As it fits this topic, I hope you enjoy it. Michigan Dogman. Submitted by Jenkins. I've had some very interesting experiences with the supposed Dogmen of Michigan. The first encounter I had with these curious and strange beings was calm and serene, believe it or not. It felt as though I wasn't in any danger and everything was okay. But my second encounter was deathly different, and it left me with a feeling of dread and worry and fear. Both encounters took place within 2 weeks of each other, at night, in the same rough area, and there happened to be snow on the ground. I'll begin with the first. Though I've had to move closer to Detroit for a better job and education, I still frequently go out into the country to visit my grandma. She and my late papa took me in when I was a teenager and raised me upright. Since she stays up late, I frequently go over later in the night and I smoke with her a while before going to bed and spending the night there. My first encounter took place in the second week of December of 2017, on one of these such nights. I'd left the small town of Emmett and was passing by the old country market on the corner of the crossroads of the paved road and the dirt road that my grandma lives on. It was a rare occasion, as I hadn't turned on my radio and I was mainly just contemplating where my life was going. You see, my dad passed away in early June of the same year, and I'd found myself in an overpriced apartment with our remaining family dog and my new cat. It was a nerve-wracking change, and I was soon thinking over all the things that could have been and would never be anymore. The slow speed limit on this road gave me plenty of time to ponder over my life, and it also let me feel a distinct change in the scenery. Up ahead, the treetops seemed to move far less. Sure, the forest would block a lot of wind from moving bushes and dead cattails, but the treetops usually moved freely with the wind. The only reason I noticed how still the night was because my eyes were drawn to the bright moon, acting as a sentinel to all the nighttime travelers. On the other side of the road, the treetops were swaying and bending to the wind's whims, but for some reason, on the right side, they were like statues. It struck me as odd, but it didn't scare me, really. Deciding to check out what might be going on in those woods, I slowed to a stop in front of them. This was the area that divided my grandma's property from her neighbors. At first, my eyes noticed nothing as they adjusted, but once they were fully adjusted to the dark, they did focus in on something. The figure, it was dark brown with touches of black and white. It was fur that I was looking at, and then I saw a face as well as a tail. The animal was on all fours. It looked similar to a massive husky or malamute of some sort. I was genuinely concerned that someone had lost their pet, so I began to grab a Slim Jim I'd bought and some of my cheese crackers, hoping to lure it over. The thought that this animal may be aggressive never even crossed my mind, since my gut was telling me it was safe. I've found lost dogs before in these woods and had managed to get them to come with me at night, so this was really nothing new. Cracking open my car door slowly, I stepped out into the frigid air and began to approach the edge of the woods. Without the dark tinted windows limiting my sight, I could see the large dog was staring at me. It had the most human-looking blue eyes. They were deep and vivid and emotional. All the regret and sadness I felt from overthinking life in the car ride began to vanish away from my mind. My mind was instead releasing the negativity and overcome with serenity as this beautiful creature's stare persisted, as if it was telling me everything was going to be okay. I'm not sure how long I stood there, gazing into those blue eyes, but I was almost shocked out of my daze when this thing that I thought was a dog stood up on 2 legs, then sprinted away like a human jogger. It took such long strides that I knew I couldn't have kept up with it if I tried. In seconds, it had disappeared into the night. Due to the clear moon, I should have been able to see it better, but it seemed to just wisp away with the wind. And speaking of which, oddly enough, The wind was once more rocking the treetops. I stood there, outside my car, leaning on the passenger side for several minutes. Curiosity and wonder were coursing through my veins, and my need for answers held me to my spot. I wanted to see if I could see the gentle and wonderful creature once more. Once my nose began to go numb, I forced myself back into my car and drove the 20 feet to my grandma's driveway. Once in the house, I asked my grandma if she had seen anything, but she hadn't. But her dogs were very much on edge, and they were looking out the windows constantly in her bedroom because her windows faced towards that same stretch of woods. They weren't angry. They didn't have any fur standing up. They just looked out the windows attentively, as though they weren't sure how to feel about whatever they were seeing or waiting for. After seating myself across from Grandma at the table to smoke, I told her of my sighting of the weird giant dog, and I told her of the way it walked on 2 legs. She said she had never seen anything like it, but she did believe me. I was told that I was crazy for ever leaving my car for a giant dog like that. Whether my gut told me it was safe or not, my grandma didn't trust stray dogs, let alone some werewolf. We dropped the matter after I was scolded and continued to smoke cigarettes while we chit-chatted and caught up. The second encounter was like the reverse side of a coin. It left me unnerved to my core. Once again, it happened within a mile of my grandma's home. This time, it was coming from the back way home from Yale. It was just before the turn on my grandma's road. Snow was coming down fast, and the wind was picking up the tiny flakes and gusting them, so you couldn't see 10 feet in front of your car. Which is why severe alarm bells went off in my head, when suddenly, the snow completely stopped. I slowed down, and just as I did, one of the upright, giant, husky things took 2 strides across the street and paused near a street sign. It was at least 3 feet above the top of the sign. It was so tall, and it had molten malice in its yellow amber eyes. We locked gazes, and I felt my heart sink to the bottom of my chest. I had to get out of there. Whatever this one was, it felt angry. I didn't feel safe. It was dark black with gray touches on its face and mane, and it was definitely not happy to see me watching it traversing the road. The predatory look it gave as it turned its body to face my tiny 2001 Dodge Neon was enough to get me moving out of that area as quickly as the snow would allow. But as I drove, the thing began to come at me, like an animal chasing you away from its territory, and in that moment, I'd never felt more like prey. I wasn't sure if my car could even outrun it. With the size of its legs and the length of its strides, it easily outpaced me on the snow-covered roads. Luckily for me, the creature decided to stop. Perhaps it was just giving me a warning. Maybe it thought I wasn't worth it. Either way, it let me go, and I arrived at Grandma's 5 minutes later, going dangerously fast down the icy roads. When she saw me, she greeted me with a Merry Christmas Eve. But once she saw my face, she began to question what happened, and I told her. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from the panic and terror that I still felt. I felt that if I turned around at any given moment, I would see that thing staring at me from the woods. The anxiety didn't leave me for a couple of hours as we sat there and smoked cigarettes. On Christmas Day, when I woke up, I did a quick Google search to see if I could find any information about what I've seen. Maybe some sort of escaped circus wolf or something. But that, I even knew, was a long stretch. After finding nothing, I decided to draw what I saw. I was listening to things on YouTube when I stumbled across the word Dogman. And this prompted me to research some more online, and I eventually stumbled upon very recent sightings of dogmen in St. Clair County, Michigan. We live in that very same county. So that's what I saw, I wondered. Dogmen. I'm not sure how to feel about everything I'm beginning to learn, but I know I'll be taking a more spiritual approach to my research, because I believe these dogmen are more spiritual beings, with the same kind of dangers attached to them that the physical world affords. While I hope to never see those predatory amber eyes again, I am open to another experience with those mystical dogmen. Always check the gas tank before planning your next nighttime drive, because if you're not careful, you'll end up stranded. You'll end up surrounded. You'll end up the target of starving creatures in the dark, separated only by a thin piece of glass. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget, you can share your stories with us at darknessprevails.org for a chance to have it narrated on this show. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails. Or you can check out my merchandise. On YouTube, all you gotta do is click the shop button below. Or just go to teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about real-life lake monsters. Spade says, lakes are just thick puddles. Ooh, I like how you see the world. You probably see the glass half thick. Ruby Trujillo says, nothing better than scary stories about water sources. I know, gets you really thirsty, don't it? Thirsty for some thick lakes. The Last Laugh says, you should do a video about military confessions. Actually, I've already done a video on soldier confessions, but I'd definitely be up for another one. Wolf McSnizzle says, more ocean deep sea stories. Can't go wrong with those. The only thing scarier than floating in the middle of the ocean by yourself is sinking to the bottom of it. And Natalie2154P says, hey Darkness, what is your favorite anime? Looking for something new to watch? I greatly recommend Eureka 7 or Eureka 7. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it's pretty heart-wrenching, so you'll enjoy it. Well then, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.